Please don't call the chair Shirley. That's an old joke, but I thought I'd share it.
Do you see? I love your sense of humor.
Surely, you must be joking.
There you go.
Got to find the humor in this work where you can get it, I suppose.
And calling it humor is sometimes stretching it as well. So thank you.
Kelly, you're on mute. Do we have a quorum?
Sorry, Madam Chair. I have someone who's in a Teams meeting for this, so I'm trying to go between both. So give me just 1 second, please.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Chair, you do have quorum. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Regional Domestic Violence Council meeting. Let's call the meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube as a way for members of the public to participate. I will ask that you keep your microphones on mute when you are not speaking. And for the purposes of meeting minutes, I ask that you state your name before any comments. For action items, we will be taking a roll call vote. I will ask staff to call out the names, council names, and then ask how you vote. We will begin the meeting with a roll call vote, call for attendance. Kelly with MAG will now call roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amy Offenberg.
I'm here.
Celeste Adams.
Here.
Zach Altman. Lupe Bandon. Joshua Clark. Christine Ellis.
Here.
DC Ernst.
Half present.
Jerry Friedel. Okay.
Present.
Thank you. Laura Guild.
Present.
Christine Hahn McDonald.
Present.
Elizabeth Herbert. Samantha Hinchy. Mary Lynn Kasanick.
Here.
Patricia Klar. Andrew Lefevre.
Present. I'm sorry. Trish Clark's here. Present.
Andrew Lefevre, present by Zoom.
Thank you. Rick Levis. New member Kevin Mattingly.
Present.
Gerardo Pena.
I'm present.
Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Present.
Chris Charlow.
I'm here.
Kelly Shore. Melissa Thomas. Brandon Wilson.
Chris Wood representing Brandon Wilson.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah Youngblood. And Chair Norton.
Present.
Thank you.
You. All right, we will move on to call to the audience. Please note that members of the public were given an opportunity to submit written comments relating to this meeting to azmag.gov/comment within 1 hour of the posted start time for the meeting. Kelly, has staff received any comments? from
We have
the-
not, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we will proceed to the next item. And item 3 is approval of the meeting minutes for February 3rd, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Madam Chair, this is Andy LaFever. I've moved to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. LaFever. Is there a second?
Zach Altman from Gilbert, I'll second.
All right, thank you, Zach Altman. Is there any discussion before we vote? Okay, Kelly, please conduct the roll call vote.
Celeste Adams,
Aye.
Zach Altman,
Aye.
Lupe Bandon, Joshua Clark, Christine Ellis, Vice Chair DC Ernst, Jerry Friedel,
Aye.
Laura Guild,
Aye.
Christine Hahn McDonald,
Aye.
Elizabeth Herbert, Mary Lynn Kasanick,
Aye.
Trish Clark,
Aye.
Andrew, thank you, Andrew LaFever,
Aye.
Rick Levis, Rick, you're on mute. We'll move forward. Kevin Mattingly,
I will abstain.
thank you. Amy Offenberg,
Aye.
Gerardo Pena,
Aye.
Mayor Bridget Peterson,
Aye.
Chris Charlo,
Aye.
Kelly Shore, Melissa Thomas, Chris Wood on behalf of Brandon Wilson,
Aye.
Sarah Youngblood, and Chair Norton.
Aye. Thank you. The motion carries. I would like to introduce Jody Hector with DES to offer an update on this important partnership to address abuse of older adults.
Hi, I'm Jody Hector. I'm the Abuse in Later Life Program Coordinator with DES. And so I have a few updates for everybody from last meeting. So one of the requirements of the grant was to create a legal remedies and victims resource guide, specifically for elder abuse in our community, which is Maricopa County. So with the help of our grant partners and law enforcement, we have completed the final draft of this resource guide and a pocket card for law enforcement to use in the field. And once this is approved, we will distribute copies to the community in both a PDF format and an online version for easy access. So that's exciting. Another update is our partner list is growing, but we're always seeking new members. So if you would like to join our coordinated community response team, please let us know. So we're looking for partners to address elder abuse in Maricopa County. And then I also have some budget updates. So we've been waiting for our budget modification for direct services to be approved. And a few days ago it was approved. So that's exciting. So now we can move forward with the housing specialist position through the Area Agency on Aging Region 1 DOVES program. And the goal of the housing specialist position is to work with victims of late life abuse to provide transitional or emergency housing, food, transportation, clothing, and any incidentals to assist in keeping victims safe. Once a housing specialist has been hired, we will create some brochures or flyers to pass along to the community. So we'll send out more information when we get this to all of you. We also have some updates on training. So we rolled out the law enforcement training, which was the basic and advanced modules. The purpose of the training is to provide law enforcement information on identifying and investigating cases of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation, including sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, to enhance older victims' safety and to hold offenders accountable. So the target audience includes patrol officers, deputies, detectives, investigators, supervisors, any specially trained law enforcement officers, and others who respond to and investigate cases of alleged and suspected elder abuse. So our law enforcement partners in our grant include the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the Phoenix Police Department, but this training will be posted on the AZ Post website, hopefully as soon as next week, which, if you don't know, is the continuing education website for officers in Arizona. So that means that every officer in the state of Arizona will have access to this training, which is pretty exciting. And as of today, we have 91 participants registered in the training. And we will receive monthly reports for participants so that we can send out certificates of completion. And next on my agenda, we also have a training that that you might be interested in registering for. It's called the Direct Service Providers Training. And this includes 2 pre-recorded webinars and then a virtual community conversation meeting held either in May or June. And it's all virtual. So the target audience for this training series is direct service providers who work with victims of abuse and older adults, such as adult protective services and or elder abuse workers. Community-based domestic violence and sexual assault victim advocates, systems-based victim advocates, aging services network professionals, population-specific organization staff, and then others in the community who may have significant contact with victims of abuse in later life. So session 1 is a pre-recorded webinar. It's called Abuse in Later Life Overview Webinar. And session 2 is titled Working with Older Survivors. So I will put this information, is it okay, Kelly, if I put it in the chat box for you to register? So if you want to participate, please register by clicking on the link, and then all the information will be included in that link that I will put in there.
Jody, our chat
Yes.
is disabled due to public meeting law. So if you could just email it to me, I'd be more than happy to send it out to the group afterward.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's all the updates I have. Do we have any questions about the trainings or any of the grant updates?
Okay, Jody, I have one question on the coordinated community response team.
Yes.
What would, if someone wanted to join that, be part of that, what would be some of the things that they would be doing?
Okay, so it's a monthly virtual meeting, and it includes partners. We have direct service providers, law enforcement, we have attorneys, prosecutors. We provide information on trainings. We have every month we try to do some sort of training from an expert in the group. We work together to create the guide. So there's grant requirements that we have to complete. So it's just a coordinated response with partners in the working on elder abuse in Maricopa County specifically. So we're really looking for direct service providers. We need some, we're looking for some faith-based networks to join us. And then also working on trying to get a financial institution or bank to join our partnership to address financial exploitation.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions of Jody about any of this, what she presented?
Quick question, Christy from the city of Scottsdale. As far as the training for the officers, is that marketing or that information being given out to specifically to the police departments, or is that something I need to do to make sure they're aware of this potential training?
So you can send it out. Anybody can take it, any officer in Arizona. But hopefully next week, it'll be on the AZ Post website. And Charles Miller will be sending information about the training to all the training officers in Arizona. But you are more than welcome to send out information. I can also include that information. I'll give that to Kelly, and then she can pass it along to everybody. And then I'll provide my name, phone number, and email. So if anybody would like more information, you could just reach out directly to me.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Christy. Are there any other questions for Jody on this? Okay, thank you, Jody, very much.
Thank you.
We are committed to working with you and supporting these efforts. We're proud to partner with you with such important work. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go on to item number 5 on the agenda. And this is on orders of protection panel discussion. Orders of protection policies changed in January 2020 by law. We are joined today by 3 individuals to share their lessons learned in new order of protection policies across the region. Judge Skupin with the City of Chandler, Andrew Lefevre with the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission, and Kristen Charlo with and Anastasia Stinchfield with the City of Tempe join us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll defer to the judge if she'd like to go first.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to present this afternoon. I'm happy to be here and share any information I can. As a part of the City of Chandler, the court here has partnered with, recently partnered with My Sister's Place to assist victims of domestic violence in getting orders of protection as needed. It's a new partnership. And it's mostly possible because of some technology that we have incorporated over the last year and a half. But as a brief introduction, just to know that why I'm here, I'm the presiding judge at the Chandler Municipal Court. Our council member, Christine Ellis, is part of your commission. And we do have a lot of innovative projects that are happening here in Chandler that I'm happy to share about, but I'll defer to the next presenters to introduce themselves, and then we can go back and ask questions about what we're doing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia, and I'm with Care 7. I coordinate our victim services program, and I oversee our victim service program for victim advocates, and we work closely with the Tempe Municipal Courts.
And I'm Kristen Charlo, and I oversee the Care 7 program for the City of Tempe. So our victim advocates, our victim services program is housed in the Human Services Department. As such, we work closely with both PD and Tempe Municipal Court, but we're housed in a separate department. So navigating the new system has been interesting.
And my name is Andrew Lefevre. I'm director for the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission, and we're the agency that undertook the overall project to go out and go to all 15 counties and kind of review the processes the way they used to work, trying to understand, where they were working well, where they could be looked to be improved, and then ultimately shepherded the legislation through the legislature, and then did the work with the Administrative Office of the Courts and Department of Public Safety to make sure that we were able to flow the information as needed and build the necessary portals. So if you're okay, Judge, and folks from Tempe, I'll just give like a real high level kind of overview of where the project sits, and then look forward to hearing from you. So, lessons learned, I think from our end, this was a gigantic system shift and build at both the court level and at the DPS level. And the law, when it was implemented, said that it all had to come online January 1st of 2020. And that presented some problems anytime you do large system changes like that and have it all come online at the exact same time across all the different court systems, the law enforcement portal, the plaintiff portal. We certainly had some hiccups probably for the first 6 to 9 months of getting things to work correctly, especially since we have a number of courts that are on different operating systems, even though they all feed directly into the AOC system. That was like building 10 different systems instead of one system for the court. So, lessons learned. I think if we're going to be looking to do anything similar in the future around large system implementations, we're certainly going to seek that the legislation gives us some flexibility on how we roll those things out, perhaps giving us some kind of timeline county by county or different levels of courts or such, so that we're not straining the system so much when everything has to come online at once. To the best of my understanding, I think the plaintiff portal has worked really well, and that's the portal that folks use to initiate the process of seeking the order of protection, to put their information into the electronic process in queue, and then it sits there until it goes before the judge for them to pull it down. I think that's worked fairly well. From the law enforcement standpoint, I know it's probably where we had the most pinch points with folks as we've gone through this, and that's, again, making sure information was flowing correctly from the courts to law enforcement and back and forth when they were serving the orders. I know we've done some enhancements at the request of law enforcement so that their portal has some different functionality. That's the way they would like to see it work. I think we're fairly far down that road at this point, and I think that's working better. And then, I'll be curious to hear from the judge's standpoint, her thoughts on how it's worked for them at the court side of things. So, again, I think I've mentioned this, but just to give you a sense for what the change in the process has meant for the state. Under the old system, when it was still paper-based and the judge would grant an order and provide it back to the plaintiff, and then they had to navigate the system, it was taking on average about 23 days from the time a judge would grant the order until the plaintiff was able to get it served by law enforcement, and then law enforcement would enter it into NCIC, which is the system that allows other law enforcement agencies to see that there's an active order and to make it enforceable by them. So 23 days, in our opinion, was entirely too long from certainly for domestic violence victims that are seeking the protection and trying to get that from the court. Only about 50% of the orders were getting served once they were granted back in that point in time as well. Since the system came online in January of 2020 through about October of 21, we've seen that service of orders go up to about 70% now. I'm sorry, make sure I'm looking at the right numbers. So about 70%, 67% of the orders are now being served, so that's better. And then of the time it's taking in order to be served, 70% of the orders are now being served within 7 days. And the majority of those are actually being served within 3 days. So we still have some, we only need to put a city in for a location, which makes some of those orders that are longer time to be served problematic. So we're in discussions about, trying to require additional information if we can to allow that. But, with the system now being electronic, providing notifications to the plaintiff when it's been served, providing reminders to law enforcement if it's been over a certain number of days and the order is still outstanding to put it back in before them for their queue. It allows them to contact the plaintiff directly if they're just not quite getting the be able to serve it because of the information that's in there. They may be able to seek additional information from the plaintiff. I think we've seen that flow of information electronically dramatically improve the process, and those numbers are trending up as we go forward in time. So when we do our next poll, which I think we're about ready to do, we're hoping that that next 6-month period, we're seeing again that those percentages of being served have gone up, that the time is going down, and that we continue to see improvements in it. But I'll say this: if there are folks that are utilizing the system that have concerns or see something that we might be able to do differently, we're always happy to kind of get that feedback. And then as we look for additional money to program systems and do updates, we're always happy to try and consider to include those kinds of functionality questions or those things into the system as we move forward. So I know that the Administrative Office of the Courts sought funding and was approved funding in the budget to have folks that are working on the system now full time at the court level. So they have that support available for folks, and we primarily are interacting with law enforcement or courts if there's duplicative orders or numbers or something aren't quite lining up. We kind of act as that final backstop to say, let us get in the system and take a look and see if we can help correct an order. But Madam Chair, that I'll stop there. I'll let the judge and the advocates from Tempe jump in, and happy to answer questions if we get to that point. There's questions.
Thank you. It might help to know the concrete steps that a plaintiff goes through to secure an order of protection for those of you who are not aware. Is that the right way to start? Because many of you maybe haven't gone through that process, even in practice. So prior to the portal being established, a plaintiff had to physically go to a court building, physically write out their request for an order, go into a courtroom in front of a courtroom of many people for other matters, and then have to explain to a judge why they need an order protection with sometimes very personal and sensitive facts, which can be a chilling or deterrent situation for people that really need protection. With the portal, it allows plaintiffs to type in their information on a secure private portal where they put their request in writing. It's held by the portal, and then they can go to any court in Arizona. Now they'll call the Chandler court or any city court that's available, and we will answer with the court's customer service clerk, and they are able to see a judge within an hour or so. And the way we can do that is virtually. So the virtual portal that's electronic, we pick up the petition on our computer system. We can review it in the courtroom as the judge. We send the plaintiff a link to appear with a virtual ex parte hearing. The judge and the plaintiff are face to face in a private setting without everyone else listening to their personal business. And then the judge can make a determination during that virtual 10-minute hearing whether or not order should be granted. If the order is granted, the judge fills out the requisite information on an electronic order. The final order is emailed to the plaintiff within minutes or an hour. The other copy is emailed electronically or sent electronically to the requisite jurisdiction police department so that they can serve it. And as Andrew mentioned, it is served much quicker now. It used to take weeks to get it served. Now it's a matter of days. And the victim or the plaintiff is notified electronically as soon as the service happens. And so that is a big plus that didn't used to happen before. So victims would be just obscurely wondering whether or not the order had been effective or not. The way that it has been improved recently is with COVID and the pandemic, having the portal up and running already was wonderful because it didn't stop the ability for victims to seek relief, especially on our court, because we were able to accommodate the virtual settings, and not even if the courtrooms were closed or restricted, we didn't have that restriction for victims of domestic violence. And so people were able to still get their orders granted and served during the pandemic when there was a slowdown in other services in general. With the lessons that we learned from this particular project was that there might be a gap in technology between folks that have readily available computers, tablets, smartphones, and those who don't. And so that's where the court is continually trying to increase access to the court for the public in general. And when we consider that allowing people to use computers in the court building, if they don't have a computer, we've established stations in the court building for those who don't have computer or internet access. We do have paper copies of orders if anyone cannot do it otherwise and just needs to come in and get it done. We have victim advocates that are available through the police department and also the prosecutor's office that we can direct people to if they need additional assistance or if there's a language barrier. And we also have been partnering with domestic violence shelters. So the one we just recently partnered with is my sister's place that when victims of domestic violence go to shelters, oftentimes they don't have transportation, they don't have childcare, they don't have money, they don't have a phone. And so being able to use the resources of a shelter and have that connection with the court, they're able to get the protection they need, even if they are facing all of the different challenges that they're facing at that given time. So not having to come into a physical building is a big relief for many people. And even if they don't have a phone or technology, typically people do have an email address that they can check whether on a public computer or a friend's computer. So I am happy to answer any questions. I personally feel that it's just a matter of time before more courts are able to offer a virtual hearing for victims of domestic violence. We're one of the few courts in Arizona. I believe Scottsdale offers virtual appearances regularly. By default, people can just click on their iPhone and be with a judge within a few minutes of calling the court. However, we still have access to the court in person if anyone needs to come in, but I see this evolving into a more convenient, efficient way of protecting those who need those orders issued by courts. going to go ahead and defer to Kristen.
Thank you. Thank you. You were incredibly thorough. And I think that you were spot on. I like that we have the perspective of everyone, with exception of the victim, but that's who we represent. And so I think you're right. Andrew was right. It was a big lift. It was a big change. There were a lack of resources, I believe, in the beginning. They may still exist, lack of resources for the courts to have the equipment necessary in the space. But I think we've come a long way, right? Like, we've been using it and learning from the experiences. And so I think I'll let Anastasia speak specifically to some of the lessons learned from our advocates' perspective. I think the other thing that you were saying, Judge, about jurisdictions doing this, with such ease, is that we're getting ready to implement our Family Advocacy Center in Tempe. And we are in talks with our presiding court judge to have DV court actually in that facility. And so it will be a virtual court, but we already have space set aside, a private space set aside, where they'll be able to, the victims can do all the work for the order of protection on a computer with a advocate's assistance if necessary. And then another room, they will engage with the judge and have that done all virtually from the safety of the Family Advocacy Center. So I think that, definitely is a best practice, and I'm super excited about the possibility of doing that. And I believe it will allow more victims to partake in the system. Our court and our police department are in the same building. And so sometimes it presents challenges. So, Anastasia can talk about some of the successes and maybe just a challenge or two.
I've covered a lot. I think I would completely agree with everything that you've experienced. We have seen as well. I think the positive is absolutely with having a victim do this from a safe place. And you've mentioned the computer challenges or them not having that. Thankfully, we're able to actually go to victims' homes with our computers and help them fill out those orders of protection. One challenge we did face was the technology overall, yes, but also the process of court sending an order over to the police department. Victims don't feel comfortable sometimes because they're like, where does it go? And I think the uncertainty of who's in charge of it now was a scary part at first. And I think as advocates, we also have to learn how to explain that process and make them feel comfortable with it. So I think we've gotten to that point. We're using the right language. So overall, it's been going really well. So
I think one of imagine as a victim of domestic violence comes into a court building overwhelmed and scared and nervous and spilling their guts about a very traumatic experience or a series of events that have happened over time and they don't even realize it. That's in itself so traumatic. And then to type it all out on a piece of paper that goes into the ether and you don't know who's going to read this. Am I going to get in trouble? Is he going to see it? And is he going to get mad at me? And that's a very real concern. And so I know the court staff and part of the rules of the procedure are that if anyone calls and an order hasn't been granted, we can't say whether or not there's even a petition pending. There's a great deal of discretion and confidentiality attached to even requests for protective orders, just because of that safety concern that victims have. And when judges are trained on domestic violence and orders of protection, we're trained to say that the victim knows best how to protect themselves. And so if a victim wants to withdraw that order or that request, we have to honor that request. Even though in our minds, we've seen the horrific details, they know how best to protect themselves. And so we have to honor their decision to know what they need to do for themselves. And so that concern is real. And I think judges that have been trained in Arizona and court staff that are well skilled have that in the back of their minds too.
But so that's a great, great point about, using the right language and being able to explain this in a way. And, we tried to make the plaintiff portal, as intuitive as we could, like with pop-up menus and little dialogue boxes and whatnot. But do you think it would be helpful? And again, I don't know, how much or is too much, but if we were able to put together some kind of, even a short instructional video that explains the process that somebody could watch before they get in and start doing that work, do you think that would help alleviate some of the concerns or help them feel more comfortable? Or again, you're dealing with the people that need that. I'm not. So I'm just curious your thoughts on if we got
the
to
court
a
doesn't
point.
see what the victim sees. I guess Kristen, you and Alexandra can explain that better. What would be helpful?
Go ahead.
No, go.
I think, yes, I think so here's the one thing we have to remember. Advocates are available 8 to 5 most places, right? But the portal itself is available 5 and after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it'd be so nice for a victim to see something like a video that you mentioned to explain what, just kind of what that can look like. But, I always encourage with videos, like we keep talking about the language, we don't ever want to say anything that could scare a victim. I know that we all have jobs to do and we use certain language, Judge, you use different language from how advocates speak and etc.
Yeah.
So I think just being very cautious of what the video says itself.
So my suggestion, now that you're talking about that, Andrew, I think that's such a good idea. And I would think that it would be awesome to have a menu to choose from so that you could have culturally appropriate videos that would help people who are already, people who are already, maybe there's already a language barrier, cultural barrier. That I think seeing somebody that looks like them and understands them to appear in that video, I think would be incredibly calming.
Yeah, thank you for that input.
Oh, and Andrew, just while I have you here, one of the little challenges that courts are having right now is with the new rule that allows plaintiffs to amend their petition at the time of a contested hearing. Are you familiar with that?
I probably am not the right one that would be.
So a new rule that happened recently is that when a plaintiff requests an order of protection and all the facts are in the petition, typically at the time of a contested hearing, the defendant and the plaintiff are restricted to those facts because the defendant must have notice of what the allegations are. And the new rule allows plaintiffs to amend, which means add additional allegations during the actual contested hearing. And the judge has to stop the hearing, get a copy of those allegations in writing from the plaintiff, get those to the defendant. The defendant must have an opportunity to review them and tell the judge, okay, yes, I'm okay proceeding, or no, I need more time, we need to reset this. When you're appearing virtually with all these parties on Teams or Zoom or whatever, it's very complicated to get those rules complied with. It doesn't happen often, but it's happened a couple of times where because of the virtual nature of things, we'd have to email a petition, email it back, and then scan it in and email it to the defendant. It takes more than a few minutes. If they're in person in the court building, it's not a big issue, but if all courts are trying to move more virtually and convenient and expedient for victims, that might be something that comes up.
So that's
not available in the portal.
Sure. So that's a new rule that the courts have implemented here recently.
Yeah, by the rules of protective order. Yeah.
Could you send me it? I'll get you an email. If you could send me something, I'll be happy to chat with our team. And next time we meet with AOC, see if there's something we can come up with.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. I think, Madam Chair, I think if there's questions, we're all happy to try and answer questions instead of just letting everybody listen to a conversation between the three groups.
Thank you. Well, a lot of really good information. So we thank you all. And members of the committee, do any of you have any questions for any of the presenters? Okay, I do have a question for Judge Scoopin. You said that you are set up so that someone from any city, anywhere, in fact, within the state, I believe, is that right? Yeah, in Arizona, could actually appear before you virtually. How do they go about doing that? Say they have a situation where they need to get that order of protection and they want the process, to go as quickly as possible. How do they, if they don't have a victim advocate in their own city that's aware of your virtual courtroom, how do they do that to get that heard in your court?
Yeah, and so by rule, any court in Arizona is given authority to grant an order of protection for anyone. It's not limited to jurisdiction, city, county, or otherwise. So I can get an order in Yuma or vice versa. But anyone fills in the petition on the portal, AZ Point portal, and then that petition is in a holding pattern. You're given a number, a confirmation number. And so that number is good at any Arizona court. When a plaintiff calls the court, let's say they call the Chandler court and they say, I need an order of protection. I already fill it out online. The clerk will ask you, what's your confirmation number? And then we have on our end, we pull it up from our end on doing the confirmation number, and then we can process it that way. Once we have the confirmation number and we grab the petition from the portal, then we refer it to a courtroom, and then they set up the meeting and the virtual setup there. They can call any court. So they can fill it out in Phoenix. They can call the city of Phoenix court. They will be able to call Tempe and get it done there. It's just a matter of what the court has options for, if it's an in-person hearing, if it's a virtual hearing, if it's a hearing that same day. By rule and by statute, protective orders are given priority hearings over all other matters in courts. And so they bump other cases. So there is really very few reasons why a person may not be able to see a judge that very same day, or there shouldn't be a barrier to that type of entry.
Yeah, Madam Chair. So the system's set up so that that queue remains active. I think it's for 60 or 90 days after the last time the plaintiff would put information in on their thing. And it is designed so that they can be doing their safety planning and everything while they're doing this process. And then, they may live in Phoenix, but they may work in Gilbert or Chandler or Mesa, and they could go to the Mesa court at lunch if that's what they wanted to do. And so it does give them some flexibility on being able to choose. And as the judge says, every court has a judge that's, is in charge of overhearing orders protection that day. So if somebody comes in and seeks that, then as she says, they go to the front of the line and are able to get in there and do that. So
that's good to know. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate that. It sounds to me like, and I don't know, perhaps are the victim advocates aware of, in all the cities, they should be aware of this, or do you know?
I hope they are at this point, but we certainly try to take every opportunity we can to talk about the process and the system since it's been changed. But again, if somebody's hearing that they're not, let me know, and we'll certainly try and get the word out as best we can.
In our situation, I think the court takes initiative to make sure all of the parties are aware of the resources that the city has. And so we've got a really great communication system with the police department, victim advocates, prosecutor's office, defense attorneys, so that the information is disseminated equally out. So hopefully, at least in our immediate community, people know. But I don't know if there's a system for navigators or for victim advocates to be informed formally. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's something that each of us can, check within our relative cities to make sure that, we're capable of that so that the victims are served properly. Do any other members of the committee have any questions?
Madam Chair, Zach Altman with Gilbert has his hand up.
Okay, Zach. Oh, there you are. All right.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. A quick question for the panel. Has there been any discussion about adding emergency orders of protection to the AZ Point system? I know I've been in communication with the presiding commissioner at Superior Court as far as assigning numbers to them and tracking. It seems as though as we've gone now to this AZ Point system housed by the Supreme Court, that swept up the orders of protection, but the county sheriff's offices there, at least in Maricopa County, they're no longer tracking any emergency orders of protection. So I fear that it'll be very difficult to actually enforce any of those if they're not added into the Easy Point system at some point. Has there been any discussion?
Yeah. Hi, Zach. This is Andy. So we have had an initial conversation about that. I believe the system was built to be able to do that. I think the issue that I've heard being raised is, since these are all emergency orders are in essence initiated by law enforcement, and they typically are happening after hours. I think the concern from a technology standpoint is, while I realize there's a judge that may be on call for jurisdictions to take those calls for emergency orders, I don't know if they all would have the technology to be able to log in, pull the information out of a system and do it that way. So the conversation's ongoing, and I think we're trying to assess whether or not that we would have that concern, or if that concern is valid. And if it's not a technology problem, then I think there is conversations around how we do it that way. But I think the concern would be, who's the judge on call in Greenlee County, and is he going to be able at 2 a.m. to be able to access a computer and be able to do it? I don't know the process now, if it's fax or how they do it.
Well, and the other issue is that they're so limited in time. So if you get an order on a Friday, they could be expired by Monday, and then you'll need to see a judge anyway. I think there's legislation going through this session to extend the length of time that an emergency order is valid, but typically it's for a very short duration. So I guess you have to weigh the cost benefit of training and the technology and the resources required to enter them into the system if they're only valid for a few days.
But Zach, if you're hearing stuff, again, shoot me an email and we'll add that into the conversation. We certainly, I know when we built the system, we built it to be able to do that. It's just a question of doing it.
Yeah, I certainly can. And certainly if the system can't do it, then maybe it's something that we can address with legislation and sweep it somewhat back to what it used to be for the emergency orders. I would guess that probably a majority of them are going through the IA court at Maricopa County. And so if we could, through legislation, make it how it used to be for the emergency orders, where if a Maricopa County judge or any judge grants one of these emergency orders, that would get sent to the sheriff's office, because unlike the Supreme Court, the sheriff's office is 24/7, 365, and they at least used to have the system to handle it. So just something to address. It's essentially one of those issues where if a Gilbert officer gets an emergency order on behalf of a victim and we notate it in the report, that's great for Gilbert. But if they now go to Chandler, or they go to Mesa, or they go to Tempe, it's nearly impossible to connect those two dots. So
yeah,
thank you both.
You have my email, Zach?
I do. Thank you.
Go ahead. Just shoot me an email. That way it's front of my mind when I chat with my team next.
All right. Thank you both.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Chair Norton, this is Vice Chair DC. One comment I have that I've heard recently from my team members is that there are officers out in the field who may not know how to access getting an emergency order. So I don't know if that's something that we can look at too, is making sure that our officers in the field are all aware of how to access that after hours.
DC, it's Andy. That may be I'll have to reach out to some of our chiefs and sheriffs and try and get a better sense. I would hope that's a training issue. But let me see. I don't know exactly. I don't know how they're trained on that. I'll have to check.
Thank you, DC. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
This is Rick Lavis from Phoenix PD.
Yes, Rick.
Hey, Mr. Lefevre, you had mentioned that some of the things you were trying to, I guess, move forward with the program was to encourage plaintiffs to add more service information other than just a city within the state. Is that correct? Did I follow you correctly?
Yeah, Mr. Lavis, I think when we're getting ready to try and do a little deeper analysis on, the orders that are taking longer to serve. And I initially when we were looking at it, most of those are a good percentage of the ones that are taking longer don't have a full address in them. They may just put Phoenix or Gilbert, and so it just makes it more difficult. So that is something we're trying to look at is, can we, if the information is available, what can we do to encourage that more information is added into it so that it is easier for the serving entity to figure out where to go. So
Okay, perfect.
Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I imagine I share the same sentiment as other law enforcement agencies in the state, but certainly with Phoenix, those are the ones that, as you can imagine, provide the most difficulty in locating defendants. And oftentimes it seems like the ones that we track, the interaction between plaintiffs when we try and reach out to them for further information isn't always the most helpful. Either, they don't have phone numbers, or even email correspondence isn't usually it doesn't occur very often. So it just seems like if we could try and perhaps encourage them to give more information, or certainly as much as possible, it would definitely be helpful. I definitely imagine that's probably the same thing that other agencies can share as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to hold true as we get a deeper dive into looking at what's causing the delays.
Okay,
I think
I appreciate it.
One of the things that we encounter frequently is that oftentimes they were living together, right? And now he's taken off. If the defendant has left the home, and so the plaintiff may not know exactly where the defendant is, especially if the defendant knows it's coming and is hiding. So it puts a lot of I'll use the word pressure on the plaintiff to have that information because they just simply may not know. And so we don't want to, construct a barrier that is like, well, if you don't know, then you can't get one. I know nobody would say that, but I want to make sure that we don't give that impression like, well, you have to know where he is if you want this served. And I think that, that's always been a challenge.
Well, I think that may go back to how we message on the form or even in the videos that, the more complete the information, the quicker it will be served, kind of thing. Sorry, Rick, go ahead.
No, yeah, I certainly understand the concern is that we definitely don't want to put any undue barriers or hurdles for plaintiffs. I definitely don't think that's what we're after. We're just trying to, obviously, the best case scenario for everyone involved is to get the order served as timely as possible. And I totally understand that situation where the defendant leaves the home, but perhaps maybe reminding plaintiffs that even say a bar or a church that they hang out could be helpful, or obviously work information, or perhaps a grandmother or even another girlfriend where the defendant may go to, or something. Just as much information as we can possibly have for a law enforcement service perspective is definitely helpful. So I think that's kind of my hope, is to encourage to, hey, maybe we can something to jog the plaintiff's memory as opposed to just putting a city, hey, where else do they hang out? Do they, play softball on the weekends at a certain park or something along those lines, just to help us serve the order would definitely be helpful.
Madam Chair.
All right. Kelly, do we have any comments or questions from the public on this?
No, Madam Chair, we do not. I just wanted to again thank all of our participants, all of our panelists today for such a great, robust conversation. It was really nice to hear all the different perspectives, and we're very thankful for your time and participation today.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Item number 6 on the agenda is Dominique Rose Sepowitz. She's a PhD and professor at ASU. She will present on the Youth Experiences Survey recently conducted by Dr. Rose Sepowitz. And Dr. Sepowitz, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. What an interesting conversation. I am an associate professor here in social work, and I am also the clinical director of Phoenix Starfish Place, which is a housing program for sex trafficked women and their children. A partner of mine, Kevin Mattingly, joined your committee today. So we have worked hard for the last 4.5 years to house sex trafficked women. Many of them have engaged in services through your agencies. And so I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you about this project. Kelly, can you pull up the presentation?
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Hold on just 1 second for me, please, Professor.
Sure. So I can tell you a little bit of a background on the study. So we do this youth experiences survey for young people who are 18 to 24, actually 18 to 25. We've done it every year for the last 8 years in partnership with different homeless young adult service providers in Phoenix and in Tucson. We are working really hard this year to try to expand to Northern Arizona and to Yuma and have some new partnerships we're hoping for. But this is our first, this is our partnership that we've had for those 8 years. We've worked really well with these agencies. And so the goal of the Youth Experiences Survey is to understand the experiences of youth who are unsheltered and to identify their needs so the community can respond. So our hope is that this survey, which is a very low cost survey, can stimulate agencies to write grants and to provide better and more services for youth who are, the services are quite targeted. If you can go to the next slide. So the 4 agencies that participated this year in 2021, July of 2021 are Our Family Services in Tucson, Native American Connections here in Phoenix, UMOM, New Day Centers, and 1 in 10. Next slide. So there are some important things that we were aiming for when we do this survey. It's a 7-page paper and pencil survey, or you can take it online. So youth did both this in 2021. And our goal again was to figure out what the life experiences of these young adults who were unsheltered, and try to figure out where they were from, what their educational background or their needs were, substance abuse, mental health, family connectedness, and reasons for that unshelteredness. We also do the adverse childhood experiences, which is helpful for us to sort of predict future mental health and physical health needs. And we were looking at the risk factors and protective factors in these young people and the experiences they'd had. We were specifically asking some targeted, well-researched questions on sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And so I'll tell you about those. We were looking for the reasons they were being trafficked, what was the profile of a trafficking victim, how prevalent it was, the technology was used, and what is the difference between sex trafficked young adults and those who were not sex trafficked. Very similar questions that we had for labor trafficking or labor exploitation. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between labor exploitation and labor trafficking when I get to that part. You can go to the next slide. So the instrument is a paper and pencil survey. It is about 7 pages, comes with a list of resources at the end. The people who provide the survey are known persons to the youth. So we don't want a stranger walking up and saying like, here's a $5 gift card, fill out the survey. We are hoping it's someone who's connected to that young person and that can provide support if they feel any type of stress or distress. The way that our surveys went this year was 22% of them were done online and the rest were paper and pencil. And they were distributed this way, with Our Family Services having the most and 1 in 10 having the fewest. And each participant got a $5 gift card, and they completed an 86 item questionnaire. Almost 100% of them are yes, no. Did this happen? And there are very, very few narratives. So it's quite simple. We were lucky to have 89 participants in July of 2021 complete this. Many of our agencies were just starting to open up in person and contacting their youth. And we feel really lucky to have such a large sample during that time, and gives us some really important ideas about what's happening with our young people. Next slide. So the settings where we completed the survey, one of the things that's happening in Maricopa County is we're seeing a rather dramatic reduction in youth serving organizations from 18 to 24-year-old unsheltered persons. And so there are no more current system-wide street outreach and drop-in centers specifically for 18 to 24-year-olds. At this moment, there's some DES grant money that just came out on a project that we're working on with the Department of Housing in Arizona. But the surveys were completed in housing programs, in the street outreach in Tucson, and the drop-in centers in Tucson. The average age of the participant was 21, and we had about 56% female, but quite a big diversity of gender identity. Next slide, please. Ethnicity was the largest percentage was Hispanic, but again, huge representation of different ethnicities, and sexual orientation, 49.4% identified as non-heterosexual. So those are the categories, but here's lots of information about them. So 49.4% LGBTQI, just kind of keep that in your mind as we keep talking. Next slide. So one of the new questions that we asked this year of all of the youth that we surveyed were unsheltered or identified as runaway or homeless, and that 50% had graduated from high school, and 51.7% reported that they had dropped out at some point. And we were really interested in how we reconnect them to schools, but that's really important for future employment, lots of opportunity challenges because of this lack of educational attainment. We're working now with the McKinney-Vento program at the state level to make sure that if we're seeing kids who are unsheltered before they finish school, that people are aware of some of the things that we're learning in our research, including about exploitation. Next slide. So why did they drop out? They moved around, they were homeless, they had academic difficulties, 12 were pregnant and had a baby, 7 had to work to support themselves, 4 were using substances, 3 were expelled, and 3 reported bullying being their reason for leaving. Next slide. So when we asked about first homelessness, we found that the youth were more likely to be under the age of 18. So those are seniors, juniors, and seniors in high school, where they would be if they were attending school. So the average age of first homelessness was age 17, ranged from 4 years old to 23. 41 participants, which is 46%, reported that they were under the age of 18 when they were first homeless. That's a huge number. We know that looks like double bunking, couch surfing, other types of situations other than living on the street, for example, but we're highly concerned about that so many of them were under the age of 18. So what was their current housing? 26% were in transitional housing, 23% were in shelter, 14 were on the street, 12 were couch surfing, 5 were in their own place, 3 were in a hotel, and 5 were in other. Included in the other was living in their car. Next slide. So where were they from? One of the questions we get quite often is, are homeless young adults in Arizona or persons who are experiencing homeless who are 18 to 25, are they from here? Are they from other places because it's a lovely place to live outside? Or we kind of have lots of different opinions that people bring. And so what we see is the vast majority of the persons are from Arizona, but just over half reported they were raised here, but many of them have lived here for a long time. But they are from all over the country and 4 countries outside the United States this year. Sometimes we have 5 or 6 different countries they're from. We do not ask about documentation, by the way. Next slide. So we asked these young persons about their life, what was happening. And so 53% reported that they were that they had drug use. Their first drug use was 15.4. The types of drug use was interesting. The highest rate was marijuana use. This year in 2021, we're going to add different types of like fentanyl we're going to add. But what we also thought was quite interesting was 1 in 3 were participating in vaping. So trying to look at what new behaviors we're seeing and things that we can address in our community. Next slide. So self-identification of addiction, I think all of us can agree, is you usually get some pretty low validity, but even in that case, we had about 1 out of every 9 youth identified as having addiction to drugs, and about the same rate identified as having an addiction to alcohol. Interesting, in the time order, 13 of those who reported they were of the 13 that identified as having an addiction to drugs, 6 of them, which is 46%, began experiencing addiction after becoming homeless. And the 11 who reported alcohol addiction, 63% reported it was after becoming homeless. So we're really trying to understand time series, time orientation on problem behavior. So we can either do prevention things, or we can do things in response when we're getting youth into programs that we can serve them. Next slide. So these are just some concerning behaviors that we're watching and teaching at agencies that are providing services for young adults, that we do see about 1/3 of the youth do self-harm behavior. And that actually can be quite scary if that's not something you know a lot about. Risk-taking behavior is not a big surprise, but some of the other ones are things that we're concerned about. About half of them reported some sort of self-harming behavior. Next slide. So some of the mental health challenges that are faced by youth who are unsheltered, about 1 in every 3 have reported they'd have attempted suicide in the past. 62% have a current mental health diagnosis. There's a great positive that you can see there. That actually means that they've seen someone who gave them that diagnosis, right? There's a little bit of hope that they have been service connected at some point, and now they are unlikely to be getting those services, but we are working really hard to get them those services. About 44.9% reported they were receiving treatment if they identified as having a mental health disorder, and 52.8% reported having more than one mental health diagnosis. So you can see the patterns in our homeless young adults, that there's low educational attainment, high levels of mental health challenges, significant drug and alcohol use, some of the patterns that we know of that are consistent but important for us to keep in our minds. Next slide. Physical health challenges, over 50% had a current medical issue. Some of these things are related to our healthcare system and our access system. Vision and dental are not covered for adults unless there's a crisis. And so it is not a surprise that we're seeing some significant reports of not having those things taken care of and those problems persisting. Next slide. So pregnancy, we had 7 of the participants were pregnant at the time. This talks a little bit about how we do our housing in Arizona for young adults who are unsheltered, making sure that we're not thinking of single youth all the time, that many of our clients report. 30% of them reported having children, and 7 additional were pregnant. So that's a significant number that needs a different type of housing than single dorms or big shelter system beds. The average age of kids was between, it was 1.5 kids. Where were those kids? The majority were in the participants' participants' care. Some were with DCS, some were with family. Next slide. Family instability. So 72% reported that they had been kicked out of their home. That's actually something we're quite concerned about. Of course, are there things that we can do in those children's homes to help support that family, or are they kicking them out because they aren't able to afford to have them there? Are there substance abuse issues? Are there abuse issues? Right. We're really trying to pay attention to why. The average age of first time being kicked out was about the same time as they were homeless. So it's saying that kids who are being kicked out are unlikely to find some place to live or some alternative place that is not being unsheltered. About 1 of every 3 of our participants talked about being kicked out before they turned 18. Next slide. So violent relationships, things that may concern you and the people that you serve, and maybe some of these are questions to consider. That 32% reported they saw domestic violence at home. They were child witnesses. About 1 in 3 reported seeing their father hit their mother, and about 1 in 5 saw their mother hit their father. 50% reported that they had experienced abuse by an intimate partner, and 28% reported they had been abusive to their intimate partner. So large swaths of interpersonal violence mixed in with mental health, substance abuse, unshelteredness, a lack of education attainment. So next slide. So adverse childhood experiences, we of course know the range is between 0 and 10, with 4 being that big number that really has incredible predictions to lifetime challenges with both mental health and physical health, and that we had an average overall of the 89 of 4, which is very, very concerning. 76% had more than 1, 44% had 0 to 3, and more than half had 4 or more. So again, a great indicator of when kids come into that care, 18 to 24-year-olds, those young people that we need to be paying attention to the mental health consequences and the physical health consequences of those adverse childhood experiences. Next slide. So what are those adverse childhood experiences specifically? So the most reported was emotional abuse, which is pretty hard to capture, but the ACEs does a pretty good job. 59% reported parents separated or divorced, and you can see the rest are all pretty significant emotional abuse, emotional neglect, substance abuse in the household, mental illness in the household was almost a third. 30% reported witnessing domestic violence, and 21.3% reported sexual abuse before the age of 18. Next slide. So what are other things that they reported that were concerning to us as we provide these services and challenge agencies to target the problems that these youth are presenting with? 46% had run away, 44% had academic difficulties, 31% had dating violence, 21.3% had been in a foster home or group home, so out of home care. We can't ask the question, has social services ever been involved in your home? It's too complicated to say, have you ever had a DCS worker? So that's our only measure of out of home care. 1 out of every 4 has reported that they were in special ed classrooms. So when we talk about educational attainment and the problems these youth are having, consider that special ed. 1 out of 4 is a very high number. Gang affiliation, negative contact with law enforcement and juvenile justice system were all over 20%. Next slide. Positive life experiences. They had said no to drugs and alcohol when they needed to. They practiced safe sex at 36%, felt secure standing up for themselves and protecting themselves was at 32%. 13% reported they had trust and good relationship with law enforcement. So we want to also make sure we're asking questions about what's going well in these youth's lives. 23% reported they did have steady employment. Next slide. So what does human trafficking look like? So the definition of human trafficking encompasses both sex and labor trafficking. So sex trafficking is the definition is under the age of 18, it is the exchange of sex for something of value, regardless of if there's a trafficker. It is any exchange for a place to stay, food, protection, money, drugs. Any exchange would identify the person they're exchanging sex with, who has the power in that situation would be identified as a sex trafficker. You cannot buy sex from a child. So that is sex trafficking. Once a person turns 18, they have to prove that there's a third party forcing them or using coercion to be sex trafficked. And we see an unbelievable overlap. Probably about 95% of our cases overlap with domestic violence or interpersonal violence relationships. So the trafficker is a person that they're in an intimate relationship with, who then also is their trafficker. Labor trafficking is pretty complicated. It requires some other facets, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So we are going to use the language of labor exploitation in our work. So we found that 40% of the 89 youth that we surveyed had one or the other sex or labor trafficking, with 12% that were both, that had experienced both types of trafficking in their lifetime. Next slide. So in sex trafficking, we had 21 out of the 89, but 1 out of every 4 reported that they'd experienced sex trafficking. That changes every year a little bit. We've had as high as 36%. Now we're about 23%. Those are all variations that we expect. The average age of first sex trafficking experience, remember that's exchanging sex for something of value. We use the exact language of the federal definition, is 16.9. So that again is a junior in high school. That person is would be at the age they were first sex trafficked. And 38% reported that they were a child when they were first sex trafficked. So we are, of course, looking at prevention, considering what that might be. Next slide. So who were the sex traffic survivors? They were, we see 66% of them were female. They were 38% Caucasian, but very diverse in racial and ethnic background. Sexual orientation, 66.7% identified as LGBTQIA. And so remember, it was 49% of the whole sample, all of the participants, which is a pretty solid number. 49% identified as LGBTQ, but of them, 66.7% were sex trafficked. So we're seeing this disproportionate representation of LGBTQIA youth in our studies, sort of year after year. Next slide. So why are they exchanging sex for something of value? So sadly, 57% identified as a place to stay. They could say multiple reasons. So a place to stay, money, drugs, food, protection, and clothing. Food has actually moved up and down on this list over the last 8 years, being much higher 2 years ago. And then last year, it was much more about a place to stay. But of course, these are things that concern us. How are our homeless youth not having enough food? Are there ways our community can provide for that? Are there other things that we can do to help our youth have a place to stay so they don't have to exchange sex for that purpose? Next slide. 90% reported that they had a sex trafficker. Remember, under the age of 18, you don't have to have a sex trafficker to be a sex trafficking victim, but once you turn 18, you do. So 90% of the 21 reported they did. Interestingly, the most likely relationship with the person who trafficked them was a friend. And then we see boyfriend, family member, stranger. And 9.5% reported that they felt afraid to leave that situation. Next slide. So was technology used to recruit and to keep them in control? We do see that smartphones have a huge role. About 50% said that technology, even in a situation where they were unsheltered, that technology was a big part of what they were doing. Here's some of the places that they were using for that people had posted them on, or they had posted on for exchanging sex for something of value. Next slide. So things that were important to us and why we think this is important to talk about is that the youth that are reporting that they've been sex trafficked are significantly worse off than the kids who are not experiencing sex trafficking. So they are significantly more likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, having used meth, be more likely to report anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, much more likely to self-harm and cut, drink alcohol excessively, risk take, have a negative relationship with law enforcement. So you see the pattern that these sex trafficked youth are significantly impacted by that experience and all the experiences that led them there. But now they're having resulting much more significant barriers to getting out of homelessness, including these behaviors and experiences. Significantly more likely to have 4 or more ACEs. And these are the ACEs that were identified: physical health, mental health, in the household, sexual abuse before 12, sexual abuse between 13 and 17, physical abuse, and dating violence. Next slide. So labor exploitation is the exchange of labor in a situation where there is coercion, force, or fraud. But to become trafficking, it has to have a lack of freedom and threats of violence. So we were unable to assess the lack of freedom, like were you able to leave at any time, is actually quite difficult to ascertain. And so we use the language of labor exploitation, and that would include situations like, were you told you were going to be a nanny, but you were actually a dishwasher? Were you promised $100 a day, but you got $50 a day? So was there wage and labor disputes, but things that were coercive or felt like exploitation? So our language is the same trafficking in persons language, but it's quite difficult to move to that next level of trafficking. So 21 different youth, of course, but the same number, reported that they had experienced experienced labor exploitation, and that labor exploitation happened on average at the age of 16, and a third reported that they were labor trafficked before they were children. Next slide. So the gender was 47% female, and then we have some diversity in gender. Ethnicity, we had 42% Latino or Hispanic. You can see some more diversity. Again, there's this overrepresentation of LGBTQI youth, with 61.9% of the youth who reported that they were labor exploited to be LGBTQI youth. So we are, again, really concerned about the issues that relate to being kicked out more, having fewer supports, and so on. Next slide. So why were they labor exploited? For money, food, look how high food is, place to stay, drugs, protection, and clothing. 47% reported that they were tricked or forced into doing work they did not want to do. Next slide. So the pieces that we saw of labor exploitation was they were promised work that ended up being a different payment level. 38% reported having someone control their money once they earned it, and 14% reported that they were afraid to leave or quit the exploitation because of violence or threats to themselves or their family. Next slide. So the relationship to the labor exploiter, again, was the highest number was friend, and then employer, and then boyfriend, gang, and then siblings, which was quite interesting. Next slide. And so what were the sectors, the work sectors where we see labor exploitation? So I think there's a kind of common myth that it's, kids selling magazines door to door. We only had one youth report that. We did see a lot of domestic servitude, that's housekeeping, yard work, things like that, drug related. So we have youth in our community that are forced to deal drugs and transport drugs. And that would fall under the purview of labor exploitation if, again, they were promised something different or they were afraid to leave it. 2 were in agriculture, 1 each in childcare, petty theft, restaurant work, selling goods, and call center. Next slide. So why is it important that we care about labor exploited youth, that they experience higher rates of suicide than non-labor trafficked youth or non-labor exploited? They're significantly more likely to be kicked out of their home for using substances, and they're more likely to have a medical issue. So those are things that we are concerned in our service provision. Next slide. So we, of course, know that COVID impacted our survey. It impacted everything in all of our lives. Next slide. So why are we really paying attention to the LGBTQI plus youth? We're seeing this overrepresentation, that overall, regardless of sex trafficking, they're significantly more likely to have attempted suicide, have a mental health diagnosis, report harassment, having more than one mental health diagnosis, be more anxious, and engage in self-harm. So we're really concerned about this specific population. They were a really standout group. Next slide. So this is when children were, when they were before the age of 18, 44% reported they were homeless before they turned 18, 39% reported they were under the age of 18 when they were first kicked out. And that we know that everyone is an adult when they fill this out, but we're really concerned about the things that we're missing in our communities for prevention and early intervention, to look for kids who are at high risk for this unshelteredness and homelessness. Next slide. Educational attainment also was of great worry to us, and how can we infuse more educational attainment opportunities, or how do we work with high school social workers, high school empowerment specialists to identify youth that are at high risk for unshelteredness, and they're not categorized necessarily if they're attending high school. How do we ask those questions that are the most helpful? And we saw that many of the reasons were that they had moved around a lot, and they had had a child. Next slide. So drug use, of course, is a huge concern for us. The age of first drug use was 15.4, and that we already talked a little bit about that before homelessness experiences. Next slide. Sorry, I'm trying to wrap it up. Keep going. We'll go to the next slide. And so we talked, I talked a little bit about 40% of our participants had had either a sex or labor exploitation experience, that 12% had an overlap. Next slide. I talked about this. Next slide. Keep going. One more. So the conclusions are that, of course, our young people in Maricopa County and all over the state are at an incredibly high risk for exploitation. If you're unsheltered or you have no place safe to go or no safe adult to depend on, we're going to see significant challenges to their lives. And we're really concerned about the risks that they're facing and trying to find ways to do better and get funding and grants and support for agencies like yours that want to intervene with this population. Next slide. So we recommend, of course, that we talk about very specific things with this group, that we talk about substance abuse programming and mental health support, addressing maladaptive coping and significant effects of trauma with this young adult population, making sure that social service agencies are able to screen for this if they're serving 18 to 24-year-olds who are unsheltered, try to build some of our street outreach mobile resource units and drop-in centers to be touch points for these youth, and they know a place to go. I used to sort of say, do you really think a kid pulls out their cell phone and says, where's the nearest drop-in center? And then we found out absolutely that is what kids do. They need touch points in our community. They need places to go. And currently we do not have any active drop-in centers in Maricopa County, which is of great concern. So when they say, where should I go? They go to the homeless campus if they're in Phoenix, and they're looking for agencies like Care 7 in other cities, but we don't have a place to send them in many cases. It's with all of the homeless population. And then hoping that we can find funding opportunities from local and state governments that is specifically addressing the 18 to 24-year-old group before they are chronically homeless, that if we can stop it during that time, we have great strength. Next slide. So we, of course, prevention and early intervention, the ACEs research tells us that these kids are at really high risk. Are there other ways that we can intervene in these homes and help find safety for them? Next slide. And this is my contact information. That was super fast. And I think that was really long for your group. I apologize, but it's a big study and it has some really important findings. We are planning to do it again this year, the 9th year, because we learn something new each year. And it seems to be really helpful to build some of the funding that our community needs. So if anyone is looking to develop programming for sex or labor exploitation or to serve youth who are 18 to 24, please reach out to me. I'm happy to support you. I'm happy to send you our research information. That's what it's for. It's really a public service research. It's not for nonsense publications. It's really for the purpose of adding value to knowledge and data that can help fund programming in our state. So any questions or comments for me? I know I read this like a recipe because I'm a trauma therapist and we hear such terrible things all the time. So I apologize if I feel a little bit, I'm not lighthearted about it, but I don't really know how to say it in a way that is different than this is what we know and these are terrible things.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rosefowitz. Yeah, I think we're all kind of I'm not sure what the word is. What these youth are going through is just incredible. The findings on your survey definitely really make us want to do something and do more. Are there any comments or questions from members of the committee on this?
Madam Chair, this is Council Member Christine Ellis. I really appreciate this insight at this time, specifically while we are in the middle of budget season. I don't know if any other cities are in budget season right now, but this will be something we definitely need to keep on our radar here in Chandler. Would it be possible, Ms. Kelly, if we receive this presentation and I can forward it to our neighborhood services, which is our director is Leah Powell, and I think she will definitely benefit from looking into that by putting stuff into the budget that might help with some of this.
Would that be all right if we would it be, Dominique, would it be okay if we
totally
if we shared
please share it members? And we have a really enlightening, quite boring paper report that has all the details in it that is also available. It's on our ASU STIR website, but we can send that to you as well.
We'll make sure that goes out, Councilmember Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, I didn't think that you really went, as you said, because you do this on a daily basis. Being a psych nurse, we tend to also try to go through things like that because the people that are listening, it's so overwhelming to them. So we feel that if we go through it, the faster we go through it, the faster they will have already recovered from hearing such things that are happening. Again, thank you so much for taking the time and putting this survey out and being able to share it with us right now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions for Dr. Rose-Stefowitz? Okay. Yes, is that?
No.
No?
Hi, Laura Geld.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rose-Stefowitz. I think you have left all of us, this information, the survey has got us all with more to bear and to see what we can do. Thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. And definitely, I think if you can share that so that we have that information, I think it's clearly something has to be done before these youth get into that situation. And it all starts in the home and also with their schooling. And that thing of it takes a village, it sure takes a village, and families definitely need help. Thank you so very much. Whew. Okay. All right, thank you. We will go on to item number 7 on the agenda. And this is the employment focus of the Glendale Community College program. Dr. Thomas E. Rojo Aubrey is here to share Glendale Community College's work in expanding the crisis workforce. Dr. Aubrey, thank you for joining us.
I'm sorry, Chairwoman.
Yes.
I believe we have Dr. William Beverly, who is substituting for Dr. Thomas.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
That is
Thank
correct, and I have been called worse things than Thomas Aubrey in my career. So, no, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for allowing us to be here.
Real quick, Ms. Kelly, if I leave because I have another meeting to hop on, would we still have quorum and are we okay?
Yes, Councilmember Ellis, and also to any other members who do need to leave, I realize that we're up against time here. I apologize for the full agenda today. Our meeting is being recorded and will be on the YouTube Human Services channel, and I can send you the link for the entire meeting once we have concluded as well. Thank you for your participation today.
And sorry for one
Thank
more
you so
interruption.
much. Thank you.
This is Vice Chair DC. I'm actually on my cell phone and I'm losing my power, so I might also get lost at some point. So I apologize if I'm not present for the last 2 agenda items.
No problem, Vice Chair. We may just push them to the next meeting.
That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Dr.
Sorry,
Beverly.
Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also want to acknowledge Dr. Rose-Stefowitz's information that was shared. And, admittedly, there's a feeling of a call to arms, so to speak, of what we can do to help and protect the most vulnerable in our community. That segues into the workforce development agenda item that I'll limit my time here, and then I can be available at a later time if folks have questions about this program. And the reason why I'm able to be here in Dr. Aubrey's stead is a little over 25 years ago at South Mountain Community College, there was a behavioral health sciences degree and certificate program that was started in response to community needs. And about a decade later, that program was shared with Glendale Community College. And of the 10 community colleges in the district, there's 2 that confer the Associates of Applied Science in Behavioral Health Sciences. And there's a recent development that's noteworthy. This summer, Governor Ducey signed into legislation Senate Bill 1453, which makes Arizona the 24th state in which the community colleges can grant the bachelor's degree. And South Mountain Community College is still pending HLC accreditation approval in position to be offering a bachelor's of science in the behavioral health sciences. Now, the reason this is noteworthy is I came to the community colleges from a couple decades close to of work in community mental health. And one thing I always lamented was the folks who provide the bulk of the services to our clients, whether this is in residential care, partial hospitalization, group homes, state hospital, correctional health care, community mental health, or otherwise. About 90% of those services, it's not the master's level therapist. I'm a psychologist, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. It's not the psychiatric nurse practitioner, it's the behavioral health technician, the CASA, the peer support specialist, the case manager, the BHT on the unit. And the folks who have the most intimate contact with our clients often have the least amount of training in things like trauma-informed care and crisis intervention. And that's what I'm excited to share that we offer with this degree. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology that it was essentially, and I share this as a psychologist, not that helpful in terms of working in applied behavioral health. Because I learned about like the Milgram shock experiment, the Zimbardo prison study, and I learned about rods and cones, but I didn't learn like what fentanyl was or how to run a group counseling session or how to intervene with someone in crisis or do a safety plan with someone who was just in a crisis. And that's what this program offers. So we have courses like BHS 175, Introduction to Trauma-Informed Care, where we go beyond platitudes. I'm reminded of an example when I was executive director for behavioral health services statewide for a place that did a lot of residential care. And a kid was at high school during the day before, he's going to be coming back to the facility after school. And he got busted with a pipe on him at school. And the BHTs did the right thing and called the DCS case manager and also did the next right thing, if you will, and did a thorough search of the house, including everyone's room, to ensure there was no contraband or anything that was, unsafe, and to ensure the safety of the other residents and other stuff that was in policy and such. And what they didn't realize until afterward, when this youth was later in crisis, was there were other times when people went into his room uninvited. There were other times when people messed with his belongings without his consent. And so to hear discussions that I couldn't help but be a fly on the wall where folks were talking about providing an informational video for folks. And, right, you look at the guiding principles of trauma-informed care, right after safety, it's transparency and trustworthiness. The sixth principle, I believe, is like culturally responsive services and folks talking about integrating that into this way to make the stuff less threatening. It's really cool to hear this trauma-informed stuff not just be platitudes, but actual practices. Other things that we offer in this program, if you take our addiction class, it's not like the psychology addiction class where the brain and different drugs and their effect on our behavior. It goes a little further and we learn things like motivational interviewing. We'll have some Sonoran prevention works come in and teach them how to administer Narcan or naloxone. We have other classes that I could speak to as well. In our bachelor's degree, even a class like on a relational approach to trauma. We have a class on victim services and working with trauma survivors. Everything from advocacy. Our crisis class covers how to do things like an emergent petition, but we also have people not only from Desert Vista come in, but also folks from NAMI come in and talk about the patient rights perspective. Our students get certified in mental health first aid and CPI. They do their internships in places like the Mosaic program with correctional health care, group homes with girls who are sexually trafficked, the state mental health hospital, residential care, schools. We also have them working in different sectors with a coalition that partners with our schools program.
What coalition?
The South Mountain Works Coalition. Which is operating with a drug-free community grant via CADCA, the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. So it's a DFC grant that's at the federal level, but what happens with the coalition is very deep regional partnerships that involves 12 sectors of the community, the faith community, the schools, healthcare, law enforcement. And we have students that sit on everything from the harm reduction committee to the trauma-informed committee to the youth council and facilitating everything from community drug takebacks to knock and talks, Narcan distribution services for parents on how to talk to their kids about drug prevention. The other thing I'll mention about our program is with that bachelor's degree, and this is really crucial. We have a lot of partnerships with universities. I'm also an adjunct professor at a university where it's a state school and we're 433 accredited. So a 3-credit class is $1,300. South Mountain Community College and Glendale Community College are $85 a credit. So a 3-credit class is $255. This bachelor's degree in the behavioral health sciences will save students approximately $30,000 in principal. What this also does is remove barriers to access to higher education and to the workforce that exist that disproportionately affect the students in South Phoenix. And also, I think I can speak for Aubrey in terms of Glendale. And so in a profession in which pre-COVID data showed us the 10-year forecast from 2018 to 2028 in Arizona, employment's expected to increase 41% if one has a bachelor's degree. By making this more accessible, we're also addressing issues of equity in terms of access to education and full participation in the workforce. One of the worst things you can do, I say this as someone in the helping professions for a couple of decades, is saddle entry-level helping professionals with absurd amounts of debt. The last thing I'll mention is we don't really have prerequisites in this program with the exception of the internship, which means we have a lot of folks that take these classes from multiple professions. One class in particular, BHS 155, which could be part of a 15 to 17 credit certificate one could get with a lot of these awesome courses, or just a standalone course. What is that class? That's professional resiliency and well-being. And what that class is designed to do is equip folks who are in professions that are relationship intense and those who work with folks who have experienced trauma. We're talking not just healthcare providers and mental health professionals, but emergency first responders, law enforcement. And it's designed to help prevent burnout, secondary trauma. We have a lot of law enforcement that takes this class. I mean, we would all agree that being a police officer is a dangerous job, right? Usually people nod affirmatively when I say that, or rhetorically ask it. And the fact is, police officers are more likely to die from suicide than in the line of duty. So when we talk about the dangers associated with law enforcement, a lot of them can be addressed in the skills that can be acquired in this course. So there's so much more I could say about the applicability of this coursework, how it has helped, and it's continuing to help create a workforce that has the relevant skills informed by advisory boards and industry leaders, but also creating a workforce that's more diverse and reflects the diversity of the populations we're traditionally serving, which was, I think, mentioned previously in terms of the culturally responsive approach to our care. And that's another benefit of the program is the cultural competency. We're changing that course title to cultural humility. Instead of just looking at who's collectivistic or individualistic or who doesn't like eye contact, it's looking at things a little deeper. It's like an intersectionality approach to understanding health, healing, wellness, disparities in health, and how we can reduce those stigmas through innovative community and individual interventions. So a state-of-the-art program where you could get the entire bachelor's degree in the near future through the community colleges, but also very strong partnerships and pathways with local universities, courses that could be taken in isolation or towards a certificate or ultimately towards a degree, or as continuing education for professionals who would like to take a community college class on something very applicable and focused on the services in which we're providing. So that kind of concludes my brief discussion of some exciting things that are happening to help answer the call. You know, they say a well-stated problem is half solved. And so hearing some of the concerns, you know, Arizona, I believe, still ranks last in the nation in terms of children with 2 or more ACEs. But I believe that we have a workforce that's growing, it's increasingly diverse and skilled, and meeting this moment head on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beverly. And are there any comments or questions regarding Mr. Beverly's presentation? Okay, Kelly, do we need a motion should we take items 8 and 9 and move them to the next meeting? Do we need a motion to do that? I'm sorry.
We do not, Madam Chair. We can go ahead and adjourn. No, there's no motion needed, Madam Chair.
Okay.
You can go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
All right. So we'll be moving agenda items 8 and 9 to the next meeting. And Are there any requests for future agenda items or topics of interest? Okay, I'm hearing none. Then this meeting is adjourned. And oh, you know, there is one thing I did want to, are there comments from the council? Okay.
I would like to offer one comment very quickly, Chair
Yes.
Norton. I would like to extend our welcome to Kevin Mattingly, who's joining us as a new member of the council. And we just really appreciate Kevin's work at the Family Advocacy Center. And we look forward to hearing more from you as a council member. So thanks for being here, Kevin.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and it's a very interesting first meeting.
So, Madam Chair, this is Andy. I don't, when's the next meeting scheduled for?
The next meeting is in June. Do you have the date, the exact date on that, Kelly?
Well, no, that's fine. I guess I would then say I'm going to hope passionately that the legislature is done by then. And perhaps we have, if possible, some kind of update on anything that came out of the legislature that may impact victims or domestic violence.
That would be great. We'll look forward to hearing on that.
Yes, and our next
Right.
meeting is Thursday, June 2nd at 2 p.m.
Second. Okay, great. Thank you. Then if nothing further, no further comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you all.